Hi, I'm Jeff Sweet. In an earlier talk, I mentioned that Paul Sills had made me realize that there were only two necessary elements to theater. Obviously, in sophisticated productions, you have many elements. You've got sound designers, wig makers, somebody to drop the chandelier at the right speed. But the two necessary elements are actors and audience. So I want to talk about actors and how they work. Some of this is going to be familiar to those of you who've actually worked in the theater for a while, but bear with me because I'm going to go to some other places that you may not be familiar with. Anyway, when actors look at their parts, they address different aspects. For one thing, they will look at what I call the concrete aspects of the part. You know, what age, what gender, what nationality, what height, what physical abilities, so forth. But then they're also going to look at the character's interior, what the character wants. What is the character's objective? I've talked before about how what we're trying to do is create compelling behavior on the stage. Well, all behavior is motivated. It may be motivated consciously or it may be motivated unconsciously, but it all indeed comes out of the desire of the character to try to achieve something. So that's the actor's perspective. What does my character want? What is this character going to do to try to achieve what they want? Now, I maintain that the playwright's perspective is related but different. Okay, let's say that you have a simple scene between two characters, A and B. Character A will want something out of character B. B will want something out of character A. And the scene will be about them trying to get what they want out of each other. So what happens when two people who encounter each other try to get what they want out of each other? I call this negotiation. I think all scenes between characters can be looked at as negotiations. If you don't have some kind of negotiation going on in a scene, you probably don't have a workable scene. Probably. Now, some negotiations are overt. Somebody comes in and says, I want this or I want that. And the other person says, yes, no, or let's talk about it. But most of the time, I think you'll find that negotiations are subtler. Sometimes when people are operating out of, say, subconscious urges, the characters will behave in a way that they may not entirely understand themselves. But we in the audience will be watching and we'll say, oh, I know what's going on. Also, I believe that the character with the strongest objective or the highest energy will probably end up setting the agenda for the scene. So, as I say, negotiations may not be overt. Often the negotiations will manifest themselves in something I call negotiating over objects. To introduce this idea, I want to take you back to an experiment that you may have had in science class in grade school. That's when I remember seeing it, okay? The teacher put a straight magnet down on the table, then she put a piece of thin cardboard on top of that, and then she sprinkled iron filings onto the cardboard. And what happened to the iron filings? They moved. Maybe you remember the pattern. Mostly, they moved into sort of circular shapes around the poles of the magnet. So what were we seeing? We were seeing the shape of the magnetic field. We weren't seeing the magnetic field itself because the magnetic field is invisible. What we were seeing was the effect of the feeling of the field on what we could see, which is the iron filings. If you go to YouTube and search magnet iron filings, you can find a video of this, and you'll see what I mean. All right. So how does this relate to playwriting? Well, you can't see the emotional equivalent of a magnetic field between characters, but you can glean what is going on between them through the way they negotiate over objects on stage with them. This isn't just a playwriting technique. You probably negotiated over a number of objects recently. Anybody who lives with anybody else has probably negotiated over the remote. Who's going to watch what tonight? Who's going to prevail? That's a negotiation over an object. Or who's going to wash the dishes, or whether you like the toilet paper roll over or under, a number of other things that people who share space have to deal with. If I watched you and whoever you share your living space negotiating over these objects, as a byproduct of this, I promise you I would learn a great deal about the politics of your relationship. So One of the great scenes dramatizing the contrasting values of three people sharing an apartment is in A Streetcar Named Desire, Tennessee Williams. It's scene two. It's often referred to as the trunk scene. Blanche has come to stay with her sister Stella and Stella's husband Stanley. Blanche's trunk has arrived. Blanche isn't there. Stanley takes it upon himself in Stella's presence to open the trunk and examine the contents. And he pulls out object after object. What is this, a diamond tiara? Stella says, it's rhinestone. Yeah, well, what is rhinestone? Next door to glass. Well, says Stanley, he knows a fellow who's good at appraising stuff. And the byproduct of this is we get a sense that Stanley is unsophisticated about jewelry and a lot of other things. Stella, having been brought up in some luxury, knows what's what. Stanley suspects that Blanche's luxuries, as he perceives them, are from Blanche having appropriated Stella's share of the family estate, which in turn means that he believes that Blanche has stolen from him, given the Napoleonic code, what belongs to Stella belongs to him. Anyway, so he examines object after object with a suspicious eye. Stella tries to neutralize his suspicions, and when Blanche enters, she sees that most of her belongings have been liberated by Stanley from her trunk. He claims he was helping her unpack. She sends Stella off to get her a Coke and tries to turn the charm on Stanley. She asks for a drag on his cigarette. He has no intention of doing something so intimate as to share a cigarette with her. He gives her a cigarette of her own. The conversation continues. But it's evident her charm really isn't working very well. He expresses his suspicions about her handling of the lost estate. Blanche, finally giving up on the charm, puts on glasses, and begins to look for the records that she hopes will mollify him. While she's looking, he sees a bunch of letters in the trunk, bound together, and assuming that they might be relevant, he grabs them. She grabs them back from him, snapping, "Now that you've touched them, I'll have to burn them. I'll have to burn them." So why would she have to burn them? Because he's touched them. Well, that's easy for us to figure out, because she thinks he's filthy, because she thinks he's corrupt, an agent of contamination. Now, she doesn't say you're filthy, corrupt, and an agent of contamination, but we figured that out. So we're back to what I talked about in an earlier talk, really, the power of the unspoken word. It is more powerful that we evaluate her characterization of his behavior than her articulate it. I mean, I've never counted how many objects there are in this scene, but I would guess that maybe a dozen. And each one sets up a contrast in the values of Stanley, Stella, and or Blanche. For this scene, from this scene, we see that Stanley is one of those people who is concerned about, with the price, the cash value of things, but is unconcerned or unaware of real value. Blanche, on the other hand, sees these objects not only for what they are literally, but for what they represent to her, personal associations and history that has meaning to her as part of her private mythology. And Stella, caught in between, understanding both perspectives, but at home in neither. None of these politics are explained. They're illustrated through the way the characters negotiate over the objects. And by the way, Stanley's violating the privacy of her trunk certainly sets up what he will do later in the play with Blanche. Shakespeare also uses objects brilliantly. In fact, if I name some of the objects, whole scenes are likely to be summoned up to you if you're familiar with Shakespeare. The skull in Hamlet. Ring, I gave her no ring, Twelfth Night. The handkerchief in Othello. Shakespeare is always invoking objects, using objects, and using them brilliantly. So that's the concept of negotiating over an object. In my next talk, I'll take this a step further and discuss what happens when you do something called transforming an object.